From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 128, recorded on March 1st, 2017. This episode is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron is the #1 fresh ingredient and recipe delivery service in the country. See what's on the menu this week and get your first 3 meals free with your first purchase with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/TWiP. Hi everybody, I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today here in a warm but rainy New York City, Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent. And actually, it's not raining at the moment, but boy, was it pouring earlier.
It was.
It was.
We had a warm last week. It got cold.
It's going to be bizarre this week.
Now it's warm again.
And it's supposed to snow later in the week.
14 Celsius. Really?
Yep.
Also joining us from a remote, undisclosed location.
That's right.
Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Daniel.
You like a little surreptitious introduction there, Hubert?
I like that, actually. Yeah.
That's right.
He's actually within 2 hours of us, right?
He is. Well, ask him. Sometimes
depending
it's
on the traffic.
Sometimes it's 30 minutes. It depends.
Well, he could be in another part of the globe, right?
He could be in Rwanda.
With this wonderful technology, yes, I could be so many places.
So many places.
In fact, last week I Skyped with a podcast host, and he was not in his usual place, but he just packed his microphone.
Hey.
And, that's a small mic you have there. You can put it in your carry-on and bring it anywhere. Laptop and mic will podcast.
Yesterday I did a webinar, and the host was in Bangalore, India.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
There was a time when you couldn't do that.
That's true.
Yeah, actually next Tuesday, right, when I'm going to be rushing back from Colombia, I'm going to be doing a Peace Corps webinar.
Nice.
And it's going to be, I think, over 60 different countries. People will be connected in via Skype.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. You're going to use that microphone?
Am I allowed to?
Yeah, of course. It's yours. It's the gift. It's a gift from Microbe TV. A gift from our listeners.
Am I allowed to?
It makes you sound better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Although we cannot help what you say.
It's just the quality.
Quality of the sound.
That's right.
I'm very pleased to announce we have a winner of a copy of Diagnostic Medical Parasitology. The 14th emailer is Trudy Ray, who is a listener of most of our shows.
Very nice.
Was actually here on TWiV some time ago.
Very nice.
And the cool thing is, at the very moment, she is in Tokyo with her family.
Oh, yeah.
And this morning she posted on Twitter a photo of herself in front of the Meguro Parasitological Museum in Tokyo. And on Facebook she has lots of pictures of the museum.
Nice.
And a T-shirt. They have T-shirts with worms and helmets and all sorts of things. Dickson, you should go.
I know.
Do you want Microbe TV to fund a trip?
Would you? I'd go in a second.
Well, the three of us could go and record a TWiP.
That would be fabulous. That would be great. What do you think, Dan?
I would be interested. That would be great. I mean, I was the one who suffered. I went all the way there. I was excited, but I was there during the holidays, and the entire time that I was there and could go was closed.
Too bad.
Yes.
Maybe at some point we could.
So maybe these parasites do have borders. The door.
But your website says they don't.
I know.
Parasiteswithoutborders.com.
Yeah, these are all the dead ones. They're all dead inside that.
Lots of jars, yeah.
Lots of jars.
I'd love to go.
Yeah,
all right. So you get the book, and then we'll do another contest. I have to find another book that would be appropriate for
could be our textbook.
Winners.
Could be our parasitic disease book.
An actual physical copy?
Yeah.
You could do that.
We have a few of those hanging around.
Daniel, remind us of our last case.
Yes, this is the last of our trio for the Peace Corps, and this was an Eosinophilia case. It was a 29-year-old Peace Corps volunteer in Rwanda. It was a male. He was reporting 3 weeks of feeling poorly. Everything started with a rash on the lower back upper legs. It was a maculopapular rash. That's basically sort of small and slightly larger reddish areas. Later had fatigue, cough, and then diarrhea. and 51% eosinophils, over 9,000. No significant exposure to fresh water.
That's funny.
Stool sent for O&P. And when we sort of went in a little bit further, what's going on here? There was a story that he had sat down, realized he had sat in something, and it apparently was feces. He was not able to tell me, I was not able to find even from the medical officer, Peace Corps involved, with what kind of feces it might have been. But a rash actually developed in the area that had been exposed. And when they did a stool examination, they saw larvae in the stool. We knew there was HIV negative, no medical issues, no surgeries, and no CABA for people who listened last time.
Right.
Daniel, it's funny that you should say it's over 9,000. That's a very popular internet meme from Japanese manga anime series Dragon Ball Z. In response to a question, what does the something say about the power levels? The character says, it's over 9,000 in a very exciting voice. Do you know about that, Daniel?
I do, actually. It's apparently that over 9,000 has crept into a lot of sort of video games and animated things. And
now in medicine as well.
Exactly. It's over 9,000.
That's so funny. Last time when you read that last time, I didn't catch it, but today, when you said it's over 9,000, I got it. All right, we have some guesses. Last time we didn't have many, and we lamented, and our listeners respond.
Oh, they were out there. They were definitely out there.
Angela writes, Dear Trypanosome, thank you so much for all the wonderful podcasts. I am hoping to be the 14th emailer and win the 6th edition of Diagnostic Medical Parasitology. I probably won't keep it for myself, but I know a medical student who would love to have it. I am a stay-at-home mom who used to work as a research scientist technician for an ID doctor. I started listening to TWiP after you discussed a paper my husband co-authored on TWiP 116, and now I've become an avid listener to all the TWiC's podcasts. I really appreciate all of them, but TWiP is my favorite. My guess for the most recent case presented, the Peace Corps worker in Rwanda, is strongyloidiasis. Now, TWiP 116, we did a paper on proteasome inhibition for treatment of leishmaniasis.
Oh, right.
There are many, many authors on that paper, so I don't know which was your husband. But that is a cool way to get into our podcast, isn't it? I love it. I absolutely love it.
Absolutely.
Dickson.
Yes, David writes, to the hosts with the most. I wanted to write in for the last week's case study, but episode 127 was published much faster than usual, a surprise and perhaps the reason there were only 2 guesses. That might be right. I was happy to know my guess of Eosinophilia was most likely the cause of the Fiji worker's symptoms. I had also thought of Echinococcus, but it didn't seem to fit all the symptoms neatly. My guess for this episode is that the worker in Rwanda has contracted strongyloides after sitting on feces infected with larvae. The symptoms the man is showing, maculopapular rash on the trunk, fatigue, diarrhea, fits this diagnosis, as well as the elevated eosinophilia, over 9,000. The appearance of larvae in the man's feces are a good indicator that this is a hookworm species and not any other nematode, which typically pass the eggs in the feces. The infectious larvae in the feces penetrated into the man's skin on the area where his body came in contact with the feces, leading to the rash. The worms traveled to the lungs and penetrate the alveolar space, leading to the man's cough. From the lungs, the worms travel to the trachea and pharynx, where they are swallowed and eventually reach the small intestine, where they mature to adults. Adults lay eggs that hatch into infectious larvae that can either A, end up in the feces, or B, proceed to grow filariform larvae that penetrate the intestinal mucosa / perianal skin and follow the infective life cycle. Treatment of strongyloides may be difficult if the disease has disseminated throughout the body, but for uncomplicated cases, the best course of action would be to take ivermectin, which only works on adult worms, so multiple doses may be needed. Thank you once more for the informative podcasts, David P.
Shall I jump in? Wink writes.
Go ahead.
I love every minute of TWiP, but as a doc, the cases are the best. And cases that can be pursued by deduction are the most fun. Daniel presented a case with 9,000 strong eosinophilia, and so I suspect a helminth. This helminth is apparently acquired through skin, can complete its life cycle, probably a heart-lung passage, in weeks and produces larvae, not just eggs and stool. It can be transmitted from non-human stool. According to the 6th edition of Parasitic Diseases, Strongyloides stercoralis meets these criteria. That's my guess. Although I read that Strongyloides foliborni can be found in some African countries. Wink Weinberg, faithful fan and Twix booster.
Wow, we have 3-0 for Strongyloides so far.
We do.
Peter writes, the signs and symptoms for this case, exposure to feces followed by maculopapular rash, fatigue, cough, and diarrhea, 51% eosinophils, and larvae in stool, sound to me like classic hookworm disease. Host responses are triggered by larval invasion of the skin and migration through the circulation to the lungs, where they are coughed up and swallowed, eventually becoming established in the small intestine, where adult worms latch onto the intestine wall to feed on blood. Presence of larvae in stool puzzles me. I thought only eggs would be present. A single dose of albendazole should be effective. Going back to the mention of kava, the British medical authorities seem to think that the risk of liver damage is sufficiently high to have banned its import since 2003.
Wow.
And he provides a link to that. Why is it not hookworm, Dickson?
I will get to that.
Because it is in the stool, right? Hookworm is never in the stool?
No, the hookworm is in the stool, but they're there as eggs.
Okay, that's what you told me the other day. Yes.
Yeah, but if you let the stool sit around a long time, like say for 3 days without refrigeration, the hookworm larvae will actually develop from the eggs, and then you will have larvae in the stool. So that's why it's important to refrigerate right away if you're going to send it off to the lab the next day, for instance.
Okay.
So Shelby writes, greetings. I have a few minutes before class starts and thought I'd let you know that I'm still listening. I'm not sure if I had a chance at winning the book, but it would sure be nice to have it. I would also like to put in my guess for this week's case. It seems like the man who sat in feces could have an infection with Strongyloides stercoralis. The rash could be explained by cutaneous larval migraines and by the referencing that the patient lives in gorilla country. This seems like a good fit as non-human primates serve as reservoir hosts. If I remember correctly, you also mentioned eosinophilia and a bout of coughing. This could suggest the larvae have migrated from the lungs and are now maturing in the intestines. I'm not sure about treatment, but I worry about hyperinfection if the patient becomes immunosuppressed. Have to run, Shelby. Gee, I hope you made your class, Shelby.
The bell rings.
That's right.
Daniel.
Niraj writes,
Yeah.
Dear docs, first and foremost, thank you for your incessant desire to produce these wonderful podcasts, which I rate as the treasure trove of parasitic knowledge. Given the effort from your side, I understand the disappointment I'm receiving only 2 responses to Dr. Griffin's case study, which is a bit unexpected, and I, amongst many, are guilty of not writing in. Whatever the cause of frugality, let me assure you that the reason you don't get responses is not because folks don't listen, but it's more an outcome of mundane burdens. At my end, I am happy to state that our startup company at Sutravax has finally moved into a bigger facility, and helping and coordinating the move has kept me preoccupied. But even then, I made sure that I don't miss out on the cool TWiP science. It is the single most fun act of self-indulgence, apart from catering to the needs of my 2-year-old son, that I perform, and not having that would make me very sad. Now, on to the more relevant and data-driven part of my email. For the case presented, the symptoms suggest a case of schistosomiasis. Given that the volunteer is based in Rwanda, I would like to suggest that amongst the various species of this parasite, it's specifically S. mansoni that is the causative agent. The infection can be treated with praziquantel. And finally, if I am the lucky number 14, I would like to request the copy of the book that Dr. Racaniello will kindly give away. Overall, I would urge that please keep up the great podcast, and needless to say, without the case studies, the listening learning experience would be amiss. I always learn an incredible amount of cool stuff about the world of parasites and the treatment options for the same. The only thing that ever comes between listening and not listening is the sleep at night. Best regards, Niraj. P.S. Sometimes I wish there was a way to cut out the bits about the parasite's life cycle that Dr. Despommier so wonderfully and effortlessly explains. It's a privilege to listen to you folks, and I will continue to be a listener as long as there is a voice from the other side of the table in Columbia University. Niraj Kapoor.
Now, what does that mean? If you're not here, he's not going to listen anymore?
I don't know.
I think as long as one of us is on the other side of the table from you, Vincent.
Right. Right.
Okay, I'm not going to do it on my own, that's for sure. Gusland writes, Hi, TWiP. I started listening over the past 2 weeks, but I've very much enjoyed the 3 Peace Corps cases. This week's case seems pretty classic for strongyloides, the rash after known contact with feces, as strongyloides does not require a soil maturation phase, rash in the area of contact, and diagnosis by identification of larvae in stool, as well as a very high absolute eosinophilia. I was impressed that larvae were found in the stool smear. In my limited experience, these are rare and difficult to find. I recall one professor telling us that 7 negative ONPs were needed to accept a negative result. Other parasites causing similar rash would be hookworm, though larvae in stool would be unusual, or less likely schistosomiasis, though again larvae would not be found in stool as diagnosis is usually by finding eggs in spun urine or in stool. Speed of rash extension can potentially be used to differentiate hookworm from strongyloides prior to ONP being sent. Strongyloides treatment is with ivermectin. I'm only vaguely familiar with the concept of hyperinfection, but if I recall correctly, infection with HTLV1 would put him at higher risk of hyperinfection with strongyloides. There was nothing in his history that indicated that he had been to the Caribbean or East Asia, which would have roused my suspicion. Looking forward to more cases. I've been a longtime fan of Bobby Pritt's blog, Creepy, Dreadful, Wonderful Parasites, and I'm happy to get more diagnostic practice from TWiP. And by the way, Gusland, we did have Bobby Pritt on TWiP.
We did.
Go back into the archives, microbe.tv/TWiP, and you shall find her wonderful appearance where she quizzed Dickson.
That's right.
And he got it all right, if I remember.
I think I did, at least.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Jean writes, this is a very short write. She has hookworms. Jeff writes, Hello, TWiP doctors. I believe the 29-year-old Peace Corps workers has schistosomiasis. Haven't ventured a diagnosis as we were moving our lab from South San Francisco, California to Foster City, California. Never fun. Please don't stop the case studies, as a lot of time I listen during my commute and get consumed as soon as I get to work, so can't respond. Jeff.
Consumed. I hope he's not consumed by a parasite.
Exactly, or have consumption for that matter.
Exactly perfect right. Timing for Daniel.
Yes.
Dear TWiP team, my guess for our final Peace Corps case is that our patient has either Ancylostoma duodenale or Necator americanus infection. The rash on the back and upper legs is most likely due to skin penetration by the L3 larvae, and the fatigue then came on later is likely due to anemia from blood loss due to these worms. Albendazole or mebendazole would be enough to treat the worms. But I would also recommend some iron replacement if their anemia became significant enough to cause symptoms. I included a picture that I found online, which I think you guys will find pretty cool. My favorite is the schistosome love embrace in the shape of a heart. And let me describe this for our listeners who later maybe will tune into our website, and perhaps Vincent will post this, but it's shows 6 parasites. It's called Parasites of Man. And the upper left is tapeworm, and then in the top row in the center is schistosoma, and this is you've got the male and the female forming a heart, and this is in reference to the fact that the schistosoma stay embraced for their lifetime. It's actually in copula. It's like constant sexual activity. And then you've got Necator americana on the right and a few other pretty cute pinworm, roundworm, guinea worm.
Dickson, the blood coming out of the Necator is
it actually doesn't usually come out of the Necator. It usually goes into the Necator, comes out the other end. That's true. By the way, they're not actually feeding on blood, so we can go back and talk to some of these responses that we've had and try to define better what's going on.
Yeah, let's do. I think we're going to have a lot of good fodder to discuss once we get through all the emails.
Yes,
that was from Yosef, by the way.
Right.
The next one is from Gavin.
Right.
Dear TWiP team, here's my book contest entry. Case guess for the final round of the Peace Corps Series TWiP 127. I'm a long-time listener, but this is my first case guess. I'm taking a semester off to learn some programming before starting medical school next fall. This means that I no longer have an excuse to be a TWiP spectator.
Aha.
The first episode of TWiP was around 11/2009. That means your OGs, original guessers, have had time to finish their training programs and go off in the world like parasitic larvae on agar culture, leaving streaks of TWiP wisdom in their trail. I'm assuming that a new generation will be frantically writing in after hearing VR threaten to cancel the show. How can you even joke about that?
Yeah, I'd like to know that too. How can we? No, that's okay.
No, I meant canceling the case studies because no one was writing in. I would not cancel TWiP unless no one listened.
All right.
And, but we have a good time, so maybe if no one listens, we'll still. And anyhow, now to my guess. I remember Dr. Griffin's mnemonic for Eosinophilia, China, which stands for something Hellman something. Daniel, what does it stand for?
He actually goes on. So connective tissue disease.
I was missing connective tissue disease, idiopathic hypereosinophilic syndrome, neoplasia, and allergic. Sorry. I started writing up a long differential diagnosis, but then I found this in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, which helped to narrow my scope. Here's a long quote here from this journal about the differential diagnosis of eosinophilia.
Yeah.
I will skip that. You can read it. It's also worth noting.
It's actually a good one. They
Should we?
point out that that even though it's a very broad and challenging differential, and particularly in industrialized countries, in developing countries, the majority are due to infections, and as we know, are parasites.
Okay, so most travelers to developing countries are young and healthy, exposed to living conditions there. Infectious diseases should be at the top of the differential diagnosis list for eosinophilia. Okay.
Yep.
It's also worth noting that anyone my age probably shouted, "It's over 9,000," when given the eosinophil count. It's a popular meme from the 90s series Dragon Ball. There you go.
All right.
Schistosomiasis is a very common cause of eosinophilia among travelers, but the lack of exposure to water gives us an out. Although I did not win a copy of the Manual of Clinical Microbiology from TWiM, I was lucky enough to find a used version. It has a very nice summary of common nematodes on page 2455. I feel that the presentation fits best with Strongyloides stercoralis, and the patient should receive ivermectin, 200 micrograms per kilogram for 2 days. And is that milligrams per kilogram or micrograms per kilogram? Micro?
Yeah, it doesn't require much at all.
And should be monitored with repeated stool microscopy, alternatively albendazole or thiabendazole. Several important points to note about my guess. Dr. Despommier seems to feel that this is a very easy case. That being said, these symptoms might overlap a little with hookworm, especially if the stool samples are improperly handled. I think it would be appropriate to look at the microscopic features of the larvae to make a definitive diagnosis. Parasitic diseases, page 246. S. stercoralis is difficult to observe in the stool and may require multiple stool collections over a few days to hit pay dirt. Coproculture using the agar plate method, Harada Mori technique, Petri dish method, Behrman technique, etc. will increase the sensitivity, but the filariform larvae present the risk of infection.
It's true.
IgG ELISAs are available but seem to suffer problems with sensitivity, specificity, and cross-reactivity with other nematode infections. RT-PCR does not appear to be widely available.
Right.
There are animal reservoirs, so the mystery poo needs not be of human origin. This mystery poo, I love it. This organism can auto-infect, which can create interesting problems involving disseminated infection, hyperinfection, and bacterial infection. It seems like his eosinophilia is much higher than usual. He's not obviously immunosuppressed and at high risk for hyperinfection, HIV, no corticosteroids, HIV negative, no corticosteroids, etc. However, HTLV1 is also associated with hyperinfection syndrome. If large numbers of larvae are seen in stool, CSF, BAL, etc., the patient should be treated for no less than 2 weeks with ivermectin and albendazole. Thanks again for all you do. If I got this case wrong, I feel I've shown enough work to have received at least partial credit. I'd give you partial credit for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, Dickson.
Chris writes, hello, TWiPers. I was alarmed when you joked about terminating the case studies. I've only written in twice before, and I'm usually behind on the podcast, so I submit my guess this week to show support for the case studies, no matter how few guesses you get. I was heavily influenced by Dickson's comment that this was an easy case, so I looked up the symptoms for hookworm. I already knew it entered the body through the skin and is transmitted in feces. The CDC's facts and questions and answers about hookworm state that the first symptom is a rash where the worms entered the body. Bad infections can cause diarrhea and fatigue. The Merck manual states that a large number of larvae can cause a cough and eosinophilia. I assumed by your reaction that the eosinophilic count at the eosinophil count that this was a bad infection, so a large number of larvae could have been present in the patient, causing a cough. While searching, I came across the symptoms for ascariasis, caused by another kind of roundworm. I thought I was going to have to do a lot more digging, but then I found out that that roundworm gets inside people orally and not through the skin, so I'm stuck with hookworm. So I'll stick with hookworm, I'm sorry. All the best, Chris from MA.
Dickson, what does FAQ stand for?
Facts,
No.
questions, and answers.
No.
Frequently asked questions.
Oh, that too. Fecally asked questions.
Okay.
Frequently.
If it weren't for that funny answer, I would yell at you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Daniel.
Don't yell at me.
Hunter writes,
Be nice to Dickson.
Greetings, good sirs. I'm writing to you again from mostly sunny Irvine, California, where it's currently 15.5 degrees out with winds from the southwest at 12 miles per hour. I wanted to venture a guess for this case study and to try to give more than just my final answer. My immediate thought was cutaneous larval migrans in general, but I wanted to make sure before I sent a mail. I referred to the case description on Microbe TV and the CLM section of Parasitic Diseases 6th edition. Two main things influenced the direction of my search. The maculopapular rash. This was what initially made me think of CLM, but I decided to look it up because I wasn't familiar with the term maculopapule. 2, the fact that there were intestinal symptoms. This caused me to look specifically for references to CLM, sometimes becoming a full infection when reading the CLM section of your book. Looking up the maculopapular rash gave me a nice starting list of possible causes, not all of which were pathogens. Since we're focused on microbes, I've left off the non-microbe causes. In addition to them not really falling into the appropriate category for the show, I eliminated each of them for the following reasons. Note, CLM was not listed on the wiki page I found. So 1, scarlet fever. I had this one 7 or 8 years ago. No mention of sore throat fever or strawberry tongue. 2, measles. No mention of fever. B, only one of the 3 C's, coughing, was reported. 3, Ebola virus. While this has the diarrhea mentioned, most of the symptoms were not. Rubella, location of the rash is too limited. No mention of fever. No mention of conjunctivitis. 5, secondary syphilis. Most of the symptoms listed on the wiki were not reported by the patient. 6, erythrovirus. The wiki page for this pathogen was sorely lacking in info. I eliminated this one based on the eosinophilia. Chikungunya, number 7. No mention of the following: fever, joint pain, headache, or conjunctivitis. 8, Zika. No mention of the following: fever, conjunctivitis, muscle, or joint pain. All of these can also be eliminated, at least as the only infection, as none of them explain the larvae in the patient's stool. As a result, I felt more confident in my belief that it was CLM, but wanted to get a more specific answer, as my understanding of CLM was that it was primarily a skin issue. Looking at parasitic diseases, I found mention that Ancylostoma caninum can cause eosinophilic enteritis rather, or in addition to CLM, which made me pretty confident that was the specific species I needed. Next, I Googled A. caninum directly, primarily looking at the first 2 results. The first result was Wikipedia, which indicated that CLM is the most common route of human infection, and that access to the intestines is not available via the skin route, requiring the parasites to be ingested. That seemed to be at odds with your book based on my understanding of what I read. So I decided to check the second source. The second result was the CDC page, which also seemed to indicate that CLM was the main result of human infection, but also noted that larvae can migrate to the intestines. Based on this, my final answer is cutaneous larval migrans, specifically caused by Ancylostoma caninum. Pretty sure this is my first case study guess, so here's hoping I got it correct. Hope y'all are having a good day. Hunter.
Okay. Christina writes, Dear Vincent, Dickson, and Daniel, I have been a regular and faithful TWiP listener since the first episode has been aired. Previously active in research investigating various aspects of leishmania biology, I am now more or less confined to the office creating teaching resources, some of which are parasitic in nature. I always try to solve your case studies and always intend to write in, but never quite get around to it. I do feel immensely pleased with myself on the occasions I do get it right. With the imminent threat of losing the case studies, panic set in, and I decided to write with my diagnosis, ignoring the gnawing anxiety of potentially getting it embarrassingly wrong. Peace Corps volunteer has in all likelihood contracted Strongyloides stercoralis, a soil-transmitted helminth. I have spent many hours putting together an image bank for the Diploma in Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and I remember distinctly the L1 larvae of Strongyloides being present in the stool of an infected individual. The larvae are diagnostic for the parasite. Coincidentally, I really like your table of Helminth eggs in the 6th edition of Parasitic Diseases. I have linked this to our course. The table is, of course, not the only feature of the book I love. It is a great resource. Thanks for making it available. I have, of course, also linked to relevant TWiP episodes to each of the topics in the course. Wonderful! But I digress.
No, digress.
The infection is likely to have occurred when the Peace Corps volunteer sat on the ground. Strongyloides also exhibits a free-living life cycle, producing infectious larvae. And it may be possible that the entire area around the poop the poor chap sat on was contaminated with infectious larvae. Upon penetration through the skin, the larvae migrate into cutaneous blood vessels and are carried to the lungs. Lung passage may be the explanation for the Peace Corps volunteer's cough. I'm not sure about the rash. I thought a rash occurred at the site of larval penetration. Maybe the man was wearing shorts only, which might explain the rash on his upper back and legs, but not buttocks. This is pure speculation. In the intestine, the female worms invade bowel tissue, mature, and start depositing eggs, which hatch and migrate towards the lumen of the intestines and are passed out. Diarrhea can be a symptom of strongyloides infection. High numbers of white blood cells with a large percentage of eosinophils is characteristic also. Treatment, ivermectin or albendazole. I hope this email doesn't arrive too late. It's taken me ages to listen to the entire episode. I tend to listen in the evenings and frequently fall asleep, having then to find the time point when I nod it off. That's hard. Because it keeps playing.
This is true.
The falling asleep, by the way, is a sign of excessive tiredness, not boredom.
Oh, that's good.
Weather is partly cloudy with occasional glimmers of sunlight. The temperature is cold, but not unpleasantly so. All the best. Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. Dickson.
Dave writes, Good day. My guess for the patient in episode number 127 is hookworm. Was wavering between hookworm and S. stercoralis because of where he was infected. Rwanda and the presence of monkeys who are reservoir hosts, however, the presence of fresh feces would suggest that S. stercoralis would still be free-living rather than parasitic, and the high number of larvae would also point to hookworm. Thank you for your very informative podcast. Dave, the sheep shearer from southern Alberta, Canada, where it's currently 3 degrees C and calm. I'm slowly working through your early pods, up to 24 now, listening to each 2 or 3 times, feeling very parasitic as I'm trying to extract as much knowledge as possible before molting and moving on to the next stage.
Love that.
Superb.
You know, the early ones, Dickson, that you and I did have the life cycle.
Yeah, they do. This is true.
It's a good resource. Would you agree or not?
Oh, no, I would. Absolutely.
Okay.
And accurate, I must say, because it was, of course, based on the 5th edition, not the 6th edition. But I'd like to know where in southern Alberta you are, because I do a lot of fishing there. And I'm quite familiar with the geology and geography of that area.
Would you like to go help him shear sheep?
No, but I would like him to show me where a secret fishing spot is that you can catch 10-pound rainbow trout.
I bet he could show you.
I'm sure.
All right. Well, that's it, and that was great, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And now, Daniel, a lot of people guessed strongyloides.
It seemed like we had a split here. We had a split between a strong strongyloides contingent.
Correct.
And a bunch of people with hookworm. So, before I do the unveil, before I tell you, they look at the larvae and they're going to identify it as a specific nematode larvae. Dickson, what would you think about these 2 guesses?
Well, as a former diagnostic technician in the laboratory for parasitology at Columbia University, that's why I knew that when you said you saw larvae in the stool, I assumed a fresh stool that just came out of that patient, that this had to be only one thing, because hookworm larvae take a while to develop in the stool sample that's deposited on the ground if you're going to complete the life cycle. So strongyloides larvae are found in stool right away. So I as soon as you said larvae in stool, I thought of strongyloides.
Why did you say strongyloides and not anything else?
Because nothing else has larvae in the stool except strongyloides.
No other parasite.
That's the only one I can think of.
Wow.
No, I would agree too. I mean, that was really sort of, I'll say, the ringer on this one.
When you watch Jeopardy, for instance, there's always a hint in the question as to what the answer is. Always a hint. And Daniel, you gave the perfect hint, because if you're thinking about the difference between hookworm and strongyloides, the only difference that you can see on a stool examination is eggs versus larvae. If you leave the stool sitting around, like I said, for 2 or 3 days, then the eggs of hookworm can develop to larvae. But then you have to distinguish them apart. And that's why in the book we have pictures of the tails of both of these larvae to show you which one has the notch. And the notch is in Strongyloides' tail.
Now, if Daniel had not said larvae in stool,
then you would have been...
What would you have guessed?
Well, then you don't have enough information to take...
So just simply sitting on feces would not be enough?
No, then you have a choice between those two things.
Hookworm and Strongyloides.
And he had no cutaneous paths of larvae migrating through the skin. So cutaneous larval migrants was not a very well-researched answer. Because if you had gone to Google Images...
it sounded like it was well-researched.
Well, if I were that person, I would have gone first to Google Images to see what cutaneous larval migrans looks like in a number of situations. And certainly you would have seen the track that the worm leaves in the skin. All right. So, By the way, somebody, Daniel, I must... I'm not taking you to task at all, but you always refer to me if you're unsure of how to pronounce something. Someone suggested that we come up with a table for pronouncing the names of the parasites in the book.
Good idea.
That's a fabulous idea because Ancylostoma caninum is the way that organism is pronounced.
Yes, so this would be very helpful for me.
I understand.
So you could
no way to take away from your brilliance as a clinician.
That would be something you could do, Dickson.
I'm going to do this.
And you make it phonetic. You have to make
exactly. Sure.
Make
absolutely.
sure you do it all right, okay?
I will have help on this.
No, this will be good. And you know what? I'll keep my book next to me, so when we read the emails, I'll now in the future actually pronounce things correctly.
Yeah. Someone once asked how I pronounce my name. Of course, a lot of people do. So I said when I was in the 6th grade, I ran for class president, 6th grade, right? So how do you run for class president with a name like mine? So I broke it down into all the way with Despommier.
Very good.
Guess what?
Oh.
I lost.
Yes. All the way with Despommier.
But nobody forgot how to pronounce
Well, I say black and yellow. That's easy for me.
You do? That's also true.
And Griffin doesn't need
Griffin,
it.
no, he doesn't need it.
By the way, I'm looking at this fresh stool, old stool issue. So some people said, well, if you let the stool sit so long.
That's true.
As you said. Yeah. And in our description, it just said stool. We didn't. Did Daniel say fresh in his description?
He did not. He did not specify.
If it's not fresh, you're out of business.
And that is an issue. I mean, if it had sat around and it's 48 hours. I mean, it's got to really sit around for a long time.
Well, 3 days. I think 3 days is the minimum time for development of the egg to a larva. That's why they refrigerate them. When they collect them in the afternoon, when the laboratory closes for the day, then they put them in the refrigerator to slow down the development of that stage. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, you can keep stools like that for up to a week without worrying about having larvae in them.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about, I think, in the past about the fact that, why don't the hookworm that are living in the intestine, why don't they just fall out, end up in the stool? And we had talked about the fact they have a cyto-adherent ability. They're actually holding on to the tissue. Mm-hmm. So it really takes quite something to get them to come out, and I mentioned these are larvae. We're not talking about adults passing out. Yeah. So they were identified in the lab as strongyloides, and in the history, I initially get the history of here's a guy, he's got a rash, he's got eosinophilia. They find larvae in the stool, and so they're going back and saying, I want to know a little bit more about the rash. Where was it? And then I get upper legs, lower back. Okay. Right. Was there any exposure I should know about? And then you get to say, well, and as I think one of our emailers wrote it, he was wearing shorts, and this was actually the area that was exposed to this species that he sort of laid back or sat back into. But here's something that happens next. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but here's something that happens next that we can discuss a little. Is he is treated with a dose of albendazole, and then is later rechecked, and he continues to shed larvae.
Of course.
So what's going on there? So later stool exams are done, and there's still larvae seen in the stools.
Yeah.
And so I'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, there's a couple different potential approaches. One person talked about that there are strongyloides from other primates, other animals such as gorillas. We had a case a bunch of years back in New York of it was the daughter of a gorilla researcher, and the daughter actually sat in the gorilla feces and ended up with a really severe case. And there are slight differences, right? They're sort of adapted for the gorilla, and so that took a while for this girl to be treated. So, that's one potential. The other is the person was treated with albendazole, which is not, the albendazole, thiabendazole, mebendazole are no longer, let's say, the drugs of choice. You do see treatment failures. Ivermectin is usually what we recommend. But the other is in a really heavy infection, which this person may have gotten by laying and getting this serious exposure. You may have to treat for a much longer period
Correct.
with ivermectin.
Right.
And we've had times where actually I've seen wonderful sort of graphings of a patient that was being treated there at Columbia. And the ivermectin is given until finally you actually get the larva, and the larva are quantitative larval counts in the feces, and it's being done every few days until finally you stop seeing them. But it was weeks. It was a very serious, heavy infection.
Right. Thank goodness he wasn't immunosuppressed.
And that's the other. Unfortunately, this person wasn't. So they're going to most likely do well. It's the immunosuppressed, and I think some of our listeners are running about HTLV1, which seems to maybe cause a expansion of the T regulatory cells, allowing, we think that's the mechanism, allowing strongyloides to persist and be very difficult to treat.
Got it. One other quibble, I guess we should mention, that hookworm, if it was hookworm do not feed on blood. They feed on the villus tissue. They actually eat a villus. They chomp the darn thing off and chew it up and swallow it. But they do suck the blood, and we've wondered for a long time, why are they doing this? And the blood essentially emerges from the hind end of this worm the same as it was when it went in, except that someone decided to measure the amount of oxygen in the red cells. And it turns out that this organism is a microaerophil. So microaerophilic organism deriving some of its oxygen needs directly from your blood supply. How interesting is that?
That is cool, right?
Yeah.
So tell me now how this individual acquired this infection.
Just sat on the ground.
Poop was from who?
Just
from what?
from another person.
A human. It was human poop.
Probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably human.
In that poop were larvae.
Yeah.
And they burrowed into...
Not just larvae, because this has a cycle in the soil. Remember that you can be free living. So when the food supply for the parasite runs out in the soil, then any larval development stops at the L3 stage.
Yeah.
That's the infectious stage for humans. So this soil could have been just teeming with L3 larvae.
And how did they get into him?
Just penetrate through a hair follicle.
Oh, very much like the...
Schistosomes.
Schistosomes.
That's exactly. So that's a great question to ask on an exam for thinking about life cycles. Of course, the other person, you're not listening now, so don't worry about it. But you say, well, how many different parasites can penetrate unbroken skin? Or even how many infectious agents can penetrate unbroken skin? And you have to start with like gonorrhea, syphilis. Those organisms can go right through the skin, right? That's how you catch them.
Viruses do not. The skin is a good barrier for viruses.
That's exactly
and only if
right.
it's so they don't get into hair follicles. Only if your skin is broken or cut. But our skin is often cut and broken. So
right. Yeah.
Daniel, what were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's sort of the neat thing that they're actually penetrating the unbroken skin. So you sort of get a visual of all these microscopic larvae actually going down the hair follicles and penetrating. And in this case, it was a large number probably. I mean, the whole area where there's a rash, these are multiple penetration sites.
Okay. Now, Dickson, after going into the hair follicle, what happened next?
They then penetrate into the blood supply.
And go where?
Then they circulate through the body. They eventually end up in the lungs. They penetrate into the alveolar space. They crawl up the trachea, and they swallow
them. Okay,
right. And the next thing you know, you've got an adult. And remember, these can be both male or female. This worm can go both ways, so to speak.
So then they're in your gut tract.
All you really need is one to complete.
And there in the gut tract, what happens?
The female penetrates the columnar cells.
Yes.
And begins the process of self-fertilization. And then produces eggs, and the eggs are laid within that space. They develop to larvae, and then they penetrate into the lumen of the intestine, and out they go.
Out they go. And that's what was in the poop that he sat on.
That's exactly right.
So I have two potential titles for this episode. Of course, it's over 9,000.
I think that's a good one.
That's got to be it.
And the other one, which I agree is not as good, is The Man Who Sat in Poop.
Yeah, we wouldn't want that.
But I'll put that in the description. That's wonderful.
Right.
Anything else, Daniel?
Oh, I did notice that Wink brought up Strongylides Philoborni.
Yeah.
How do I pronounce that, Dickson?
Yeah, Philoborni. I want to correct something I just said, though, because there's one other parasite. And I know that there's somebody out there listening and says, he missed it. But I didn't, because I just remembered it. It's Capillaria philipinensis.
Oh, that's true. I was actually just translating that table into Spanish just before I jumped on, and yes, you can find
eggs sometimes, and then as the infection progresses, you can find larvae, and the larvae are in the stool, and they I don't think they closely resemble those of hookworm or Strongyloides, but it's certainly another parasite, another nematode that can actually result in larvae being found in stool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but it's geographically restricted.
Yeah, go to page 307 of our 6th edition, and there's a nice chart. You can actually see stool examination for larvae, Capillaria philipinensis.
Exactly. John Cross, who is a dear friend of mine and unfortunately has passed, discovered that life cycle and wrote a lot about it while he was in the Navy stationed in the Philippines at Namru. And we became very close friends after that, and he would always be talking about the life cycle and how unusual it is because it can both produce eggs and then eventually switch to larval production. So quite an unusual parasite in that sense.
Excellent.
So I'm sorry that I didn't mention that.
So Philoborni, which is interesting, right? I mean, this is a particular It I guess causes a particular syndrome that was described in New Guinea, right?
Yes.
And this is where young kids are infected and they develop this swollen belly syndrome. Right. And so it's interesting that he brought that up. I don't know, actually, Dickson, maybe you know about whether or not Philoborni is particularly prevalent. I know it's found in some African countries, but I don't know if it's particularly prevalent.
I don't know much about that, to be honest. And I haven't heard much about it, so I'm not sure it's been examined that carefully.
And that's probably the issue is, a lot of places they're doing a morphological recognition. Oh, this is Strongyloides. Boom. We're good to go. Let's move forward.
That's right.
And it is interesting. I mean, I've seen, unfortunately, severe Strongyloides infections in young kids in the developing world. And often it goes along with the malnutrition. It's one of the later kids in a string of children. Yep. Kids not eating much. The reason they're exposed often is they're on like the dirt floor. And they end up with a swollen belly. But a lot of this is about malnutrition, swollen belly, a Strongyloides infection, exposure, as well as malnutrition. So. Yeah. It's a huge problem, Strongyloides throughout the world.
So many reservoir hosts, too.
Daniel, you mentioned after treatment he continued to excrete larvae for a period, and then what happened? Did you follow up even more?
I haven't followed up yet, and actually on this call, I'm going to be discussing this case with the medical officer who was involved in the care, but not something that would be too surprising to have persistent shedding of larvae into something where I would, in general, recommend treating with ivermectin for a prolonged period of time until you document clearance of the. And if you don't, if you're not seeing clearance rapidly enough, you start, as I think people mentioned, looking for other things that might be going, some immune issue, HTLV1, which is really, as mentioned, common through the Caribbean. There's pockets in South America. Peru has some areas. Persia, right? We've got a big population here in Great Neck of Iranian or Persian descent. There's areas in Japan. It's actually HTLV1 is pretty spread viral disease. So
there's one more condition besides immunosuppression that can lead to hyperinfection that it's not a common occurrence, but imagine a patient that has a bowel tumor that slows down the gut time for transit of material leaving the gut. That's enough time for these larvae to actually develop from the first stages, which they're hatched at, to the third stage. And if they're third stage larvae inside the host, they'll just penetrate and complete the life cycle again. So bowel tumors and ameboma, by the way, falls into that category as well. So you've got immunosuppression, bowel tumor, and amebomas all could lead to hyperinfection with this parasite.
Yeah, and I think we actually mentioned that when we were talking about our the amoebic abscess case, right?
Mm-hmm. We did touch on it.
Yep.
We did.
So
right. So then, by the way, that's one of the big reasons for keeping track of these life cycles, because if you know what could happen, And if you're not thinking about how this worm completes its cycle, then perhaps you're overlooking something. And so I don't mind belaboring this point for some listeners, because I think for the most part it gets you to think about the mechanisms involved in these infections.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron's mission is to make incredible home cooking accessible to everyone while supporting a more sustainable food system and setting the highest standards for ingredients, and finally building a community of home chefs. That's a lofty set of goals, but I think they can do it. What they do is deliver recipes, seasonal recipes, along with fresh, high-quality ingredients so you can make delicious home-cooked meals. Every meal comes with a step-by-step recipe card, which is beautiful, pre-proportioned ingredients, and in 40 minutes or less you have a meal. So if you spend a lot eating out or at high-end grocery chains, you can now expect under $10 per person for healthy home-cooked meals. I think that's a pretty good price. And I have done this. It's really wonderful. It's delicious. It's easy to do. I like to eat, but I don't like to cook because I don't like getting everything together. I don't mind preparing and all that. I hate finding everything. But it's all in a box, and they give you everything but salt, pepper, and oil. Now, how do they get their food? It's really neat. They have a community of over 150 local farms, fisheries, and ranchers all across the U.S., and they, for example, source their seafood sustainably under standards developed along with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. Their meat, chicken, beef, pork, come from responsibly raised animals. They get produce from farms that practice regenerative farming, and because they ship the exact amount that you need, they reduce food waste, and you don't overeat. Now, if you have a meal for two, if you each eat your portion, you'll be good. If you, of course, eat both portions, then you're going to be overeating. We can't stop that. So you can decide what to get when, based on your preferences. You can get meat, non-meat. You can get a period, weekly, every other week, whatever you want. There's no requirement. And they deliver to 99% of the U.S. And they do not repeat their recipes within a year. A week's recipe is not repeated within the year, so you're always going to get something new. Here's some new ones for March. Pork chops and miso butter with bok choy and marinated apple.
Wow.
Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Very.
Vegetable chili and baked sweet potatoes with crispy tortilla strips, and spicy shrimp coconut curry with cabbage and rice. Dickson, you want to try it out?
Absolutely.
I can give you a code. You can get it.
All right.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I know you are a chef extraordinaire. I've eaten at your house once.
We'll invite you back sometime.
No. I'm not asking you. I'm just saying.
You can come over to our house anytime.
I tell you, I went into your house. You were doing all the cooking pretty much. Yeah, and
I like to cook.
You also cleaned up, which was really nice. And your food was good.
Thank you.
So anyway, one more. Spicy shrimp coconut curry with cabbage and rice. Did I mention that?
Yeah. Anyway, you did. That's the one that I want.
You want that one? So check out this week's menu and then get 3 meals free with your first purchase, and you'll get free shipping with that. Go to blueapron.com/TWiP. That's blueapron.com, one word, /TWiP. You will love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals with Blue Apron. So don't wait. I've tried it. As I said, I love it.
Right.
Blue Apron, a better way to cook. We thank them for their support of TWiP. It's interesting. A lot of parasites you acquire through eating, and here we have a food advertisement.
This be true. Plus, we're in great company, by the way, because Blue Apron also advertises on NPR. So I actually heard.
You hear them?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
so, they're making a big national push.
Well, they're doing a good job.
I'm honored that they would include us.
Absolutely.
Because you would think after people listen to Parasites, they don't want to hear about food. But
well, they want to know where their food comes from after that, and they can know where that comes from if they subscribe to Blue Apron.
Blue Apron.
So that's a good deal.
And we have a paper.
We do.
Published in Veterinary Parasitology.
Indeed.
This was selected by Professor Despommier. It's called The Induction of the Collagen Capsule Synthesis by Trichinella spiralis is closely related to protease-activated receptor 2. This comes from a group in Pusan National University in Korea.
Right.
That would be South Korea, Dickson.
Yes.
Right? I don't know if they do any research in North Korea. We would
if they
know
do,
if they
never
did.
know. That's right.
Now, Dickson, this is your organism.
It used to be. That's
not anymore.
Well, no, I still think about it a lot. That's why I selected this article.
They say here it's the largest known intracellular parasite.
It's true. I actually coined that phrase.
And in fact, they reference your papers.
They do. Except
paper.
One, and we'll get to that.
Okay. So I think this is your field. Tell us about it.
I will. I'll give you some background, but I would like you to review the paper because there's a lot of molecular biology in this. So, so the other thing is I don't have access to the paper on my iPod, so I don't see how to get it.
Don't?
No, it's not refreshed, I guess, or something. But it's okay. I'll get to that.
You want me to print it out and go get it for you?
No, don't do that.
Okay.
So I will just give the background to this.
All right, so I can describe it and you can critique it.
Yeah, that'll be good.
All right.
So Trichinella spiralis, and there are now up to 9 species of Trichinella known throughout the world, and it can be divided into 2 groups, basically.
What did you say?
Yeah, what did he just say?
They can be divided into 2 groups.
Oh my gosh, I didn't understand that at all.
Perhaps I slurred through that one a little bit, but I'm sorry.
Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Daniel, I think you need to come here.
No, I'm doing fine, thank you.
I feel safer here.
I'm sure you do. And by the way, I haven't sat in anything, so don't worry about that.
Okay.
See, so Trichinella groups, you can group them in 2 different ways. The first is by geographic distribution, and the second is by the fact that some form a capsule, which they used to call a capsule, right?
Wait, some form of capsule, which they used to call a capsule?
They used to call it something else besides a capsule.
Okay. Daniel, I'm getting worried here.
I know.
Would you like me to continue to talk, or would you like to just...
I can't help it. You're just such a jovial guy.
Today I feel pretty good because we're dealing with a subject that I feel comfortable
I'll
talking
shut up.
about.
I'm sorry.
No, don't shut up. Don't shut up. So for a long time, all we knew about was Trichinella spiralis because that was the first one discovered, and it was discovered back in 1835. So we've been working with that for a long time, and we've finally come to discover the fact that this parasite needs to control host gene expression if it is to complete its life cycle. That's rather remarkable considering that a lot of these other parasites that we've been discussing, including Strongyloides and Ascaris and Echinococcus, maybe with the possible exception of Toxoplasma gondii, which has a similar strategy, an intracellular strategy for controlling host genomic expression as well. A lot of these parasites are there because of brute force. They just chew their way into a tissue, insist, and stay there, right? Well, Trichinella is a little more sophisticated. It's a molecular biologist par excellence for the nematode group. And as it crawls into a muscle cell as a small larva, so small that it's less than the diameter of a muscle fiber, in 20 days following that event, it's now an infectious larva for the next host. And when you look under the microscope, under the light microscope in this case, you can see this very hyaline area surrounding the zone that the worm lives in. Mm-hmm. So this entire unit, I must say that I guess I should take credit for naming that unit as the nurse cell parasite complex. And I studied...
the nurse, because it's nursing the parasite.
That's right. It actually allows that parasite to grow up into an infectious larva. Not only that, this parasite can live there for some time. And in fact, for human cases, the longest lived known parasite host complex lasted 30 years because they knew when this person acquired the infection, and they swore that they never ate a single piece of meat after that because they knew how they acquired it. When they died, they autopsied this person's tissues and they found living larvae in it. Quite remarkable. So this has a long-term survival strategy for the parasite to allow it to move from one place to the next throughout the ecology of wherever it is without affecting so much the host itself. It doesn't want to do any harm to the host. All it wants to do is get to the next host. And it doesn't care whether it gets there if the host is predated by, let's say, a lion eating a warthog, or that the lion actually dies and it becomes consumed by scavengers, and in its meat you will find some Trichinella larvae, and that's how it goes. So its outer shell, so to speak, this capsule, turns out to be made out of collagen of 2 types.
Right.
And you can determine that by simply digesting it with certain collagenases, and some work against this type and some work against another type. There are, I think, probably up around 23 or 24 different kinds of collagen now that's known to be produced by mammals, and particularly humans. 23 different collagen genes for different situations throughout the body. Okay, so the septum in our nose is collagen, and some of this ear flap that we've got over here is made out of collagen. Mm-hmm. And every cell has the capacity for making collagen, but actually does it. So this parasite somehow induces the formation of collagen type 4 and type 6, which forms the two matrices that eventually ends up as this house.
Now, in fact, they cite your review article.
Well, they do.
Despommier, 1998.
That's right.
Now, these two types of collagen, 4 and 6, are they normally produced in muscle cells?
They are not normally produced
so
in
the
muscle
parasite's turning them on.
That's correct.
And I think that's what they would like to know, how it happens.
I would, too. In fact, you
thought they were going to answer that question.
I was hoping that they could come up with a more definitive answer. They did show that the secretion products of the larva, taken as a whole, in tissue culture and fibroblasts, which are the other cell type that can manufacture this collagen type, actually it turns on some of these genes. So I'm jumping ahead on the story, but the point is that if you look at the construction of this shell, or this roof to the house, so to speak, collagen type 4 is a very large molecule. Collagen type 6 is a very small molecule. Collagen type 4 forms the struts, or you'd call them the joists of the house. And you get the struts going across from joist to joist. Those are the collagen 6 molecules. As we will see, as this story progresses, collagen type 4 is made only once during the formation of the nerve cell. But as our results indicated, at least, which were unfortunately not quoted in this paper, collagen type 6, it was on 8 months after the infection had established itself in the muscle tissue, and there's a good reason why that should stay on rather than type 4. So let's now find out about this paper, about the further exploration of collagen synthesis for the capsule of the nerve cell parasite complex.
So, Dickson, they say they use a strain of Racaniello that they got from a human,
right?
Maintained via serial passage in mice.
Okay.
So, but you can grow these in culture, also. No, you're not. You have to infect mice.
You do,
all right, and then they say, in order to obtain muscle stage larvae, the eviscerated mice were cut into pieces. Now, I don't know what eviscerated means. They take out their intestines.
They skin them. They cut off their hands and feet. They take out all the viscera. And now all they're left with is bone and muscle tissue.
And they chop that up.
They chop it into tiny little pieces.
And then they digest it with pepsin and hydrochloride.
That's right.
And that's going to give you larvae.
Yeah, we'll digest the host, essentially, and leave the larvae.
They collected the larvae under a microscope, so you have to do it manually, basically.
Not necessarily.
So why are they cutting off the hands and feet?
Well, because it doesn't really have much muscle tissue associated with the hands and feet. It sort of gets in the way of the digestion process.
Okay.
All right, so the first experiment...
It's a classic way of doing it, basically.
First experiment, they want to know which collagen genes are upregulated by Racaniello in muscle stage larvae.
That's right.
So they looked at gene expression. They looked for RNA by PCR, I believe. And they look at all the collagens. They find type 1, 4, and 6 genes are upregulated after infection.
Yeah.
So this is in a mouse, I presume. They take these out of the mice and they immediately look at the RNAs and see what...
Mash the muscle up and do an extract for RNA and look.
They also look at PAR2 expression. Do you know what that is, PAR2? So PAR2 is protease activated receptor number 2.
Yeah.
And they think it's one of the proteins involved in induction of collagen. It's a host protein as well.
Yeah.
Then this is turned on later in these. They're looking at times after infection of mice. 0, 7, 14, 28, 42 days. Is that after infection of mice?
Yes.
And at each of those points, they remove...
That's right. They infect orally.
Muscle tissues. They take the muscle tissues out and they look for viral RNA.
Correct.
Sorry, not viral. Wrong podcast.
No, that's right.
They look total RNA and they look for...
so one disadvantage of doing it their way, that's the classic way they feed these larvae orally, is that when the worms actually establish in the gut tract, okay, and they start producing larvae, that's on the 6th day after the infection. They will produce larvae up to the 14th day after the infection.
Got it.
But the problem is that in the muscle tissue, they're not sure of how old those larvae are.
Right.
They could be anywhere from 6 days, well, certainly more than that,
Sure.
6 days apart in age.
So it's not synchronous.
It's not synchronous,
Okay.
whereas we dealt with synchronous infections.
Now, what do you think about the finding that type 1, 4, and 6 collagen in part 2 is induced?
No, that's fine. That's absolutely consistent with the results that we got earlier on. The type 1 collagen, I'm not sure even if we had a proper probe for it or not. So
But we don't know where. I mean, they're just taking muscle.
that's right. They're not sure of where this is occurring.
I mean, this could be occurring outside of where the larvae are.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
All right.
So you feel like a synchronous infection would have been more telling, Dickson?
Well,
rather
you
than
could have pinpointed the exact moment at which the collagen genes are turned on. Right? You could have, in the hour, you could have seen this, but you'd have to do something else. So we conducted most of our experiments with doing northerns.
I think, couldn't they do sections and look in situ?
And then we did in situs. We did a lot of in situs. And so as a result, we could see where it was being produced and we could tell when it was being produced. Yeah. And they have a vague knowledge of when it and where it's being produced, but as we'll see as this goes on, it gets more interesting.
All right. The next thing they do is they make ES proteins from muscle stage larvae. What does that mean?
So ES stands for excretion and secretion products. Now, they didn't know whether or not in the old days, and they used this as an antigen preparation for immunodetection, okay, of the infections. When they say ES, they're not sure of whether it's an excreted product or whether it's a secreted product.
Okay.
And so our feeling is, the group that works on trichinella, is that most of what it produces over, let's say, the first 5 hours of an in vitro situation of just maintaining them in vitro, it's not excreting anything, it's secreting something, okay? But they cultured for 2 days.
Right.
Now, those are maintenance cultures.
They're not growing.
They're not going to grow or anything,
right.
but presumably all the worms were alive at the end of the second day, which is a stretch, by the way, because the media are not exactly great for this. These worms are obligate anaerobes at this point. So you have to be very careful as to what you do. But then they collected the supernatant, which is pretty easy to do because it's a big worm, and then they analyze the supernatant for activity.
So they take these supernatants and they apply them to cultured murine embryonic fibroblast cells.
Exactly.
And then they say what goes up.
Yep.
And they do gene expression, which is, again, PCR for different genes. And they see some signal transduction proteins, SMOD2 and TGF-beta1. They go up. And they also see collagen type 1 expression goes up.
Yes.
After treatment with these ES proteins. And that increase is inhibited by serine protease inhibitors.
Right. That's interesting. That's something I didn't know before.
Right,
so that's a finding that I'm...
And so they think the collagen gene expression seems to be related to protease activity.
Right.
So then they use a PAR2 agonist and a PAR2 antagonist with or without ES proteins.
Right.
So the agonist will stimulate PAR2, which is a protease-activated receptor. Now remember, it's a receptor. It's involved in signal transduction.
Yep.
It has to be activated by a protease.
Indeed.
The PAR2 agonist significantly enhances type 1 collagen gene production, as well as TGF-beta and SMOD gene expression levels. I believe those are transcription factors. This enhanced expression is promoted by ES proteins and inhibited by treatment with the antagonist. So PAR2 is a protease, is a receptor, basically, that has to signal. If you inhibit it, you inhibit the ES cell stimulation of collagen production.
Right.
And so they're thinking that something produced by the trichinella has to bind this PAR2 receptor, and that turns on, of course, collagen synthesis. That makes sense, right? Something like that must be happening. They'd like to tease it out. Right? Are you okay with that, Dickson?
So far.
All right. Then they do an infection of mice again. They want to know which collagen type is related to PAR2. So they did a time course of type 1, 4, and 6 collagen gene expression in the muscle tissue of wild-type mice or mice in which the PAR2 gene has been knocked out. So that's a good experiment.
It's a very good experiment. That's nice.
Because if you think PAR2 is important.
It's good. It's very good.
They found gene expressions of type 1 and 4 collagen are significantly lower in the PAR2 knockout mice at 14 and 28 days after infection. Type 6 was slightly reduced in the PAR2 knockout mice. Not significant, right?
Yeah, see, that's the one we found that was constitutively turned on. It doesn't go off after that.
I see.
So that's consistent with.
And then these other genes, SMODs and the TGF, transforming growth factor, which were turned on in mice after infection, they're not turned on anymore in the PAR2 knockout mice.
Right, and they implicated in their discussion, at least, about the transforming growth factor 1, that's associated with angiogenesis.
Okay.
And we'll come back to that.
And that is the last experiment in this paper.
Okay.
So basically, expression levels of type 1, 4, and 6 go up after T. spiralis infection, but their expression is decreased in PAR2 knockout mice.
There you go.
They're also turned on by ES proteins.
Yes.
In cell culture.
Yeah, but ES proteins, in this case, when you do a two-dimensional gel electrophoresis, you end up with 300 spots.
Yeah,
which one is which, right?
Of course.
So that's still going to beg the question as to what's going on. But as I mentioned to you in our earlier pre-TWiP briefing, we have these little meetings.
Sounds very official.
Yeah, it's very, very official. There are two kinds of trichinella, the kind that makes a capsule and the kind that doesn't.
I thought you were going to say the kind that make you sick.
They all make you sick, believe me. So why not compare Trichinella spiralis with, let's say, Trichinella pseudospiralis, which doesn't make a capsule?
So you could make ES proteins from both.
Yeah, sure you can. Sure,
and then see what the difference is. That would be, so that's why I said you are a real parasitologist, because you think in terms of comparing organisms that have different biological properties.
Exactly,
that's important.
Exactly.
By the way, they say here in the discussion, they say nerve cell formation is important, but there's a lot of debate on the mechanisms, and they say Despommier has written several papers on the mechanism.
He did. He can't write it anymore, though, because he doesn't have any more data.
Well, yes, you don't do research any longer, but obviously you've made a contribution to the
Well, I still
field,
think about this
which
system.
still endures.
Still endures, that's right. So I'm surprised that somebody hasn't done the proteasome of this and just get it over with and find out what these proteins are.
Absolutely. And your experiment comparing the two different species is great. Can you genetically alter Trichinella?
Well, here's another thing. Can you make a hybrid between pseudospiralis and spiralis and then see what happens?
I bet you could use CRISPR to knock out genes.
I'm sure you could do
And then you could start saying, what do you need for inducing collagen?
You got to get the CRISPR through the cuticle, however. So you have to somehow get that into the worm.
Well, I think there's work, right, where they're using pseudotyped virus retroviral delivery systems in Trichinella. Yeah, so you could easily pop something in. Okay. And actually, it would be nice if you have a limited number of these are the genes that are responsible for the ES. You could take your non-capsule forming variant and then one at a time just pop stuff in.
One at a time. That's right.
One at a time.
I bet you could transfect a pseudospiralis with the genes once you found out, and then get them to make a capsule.
Exactly. And that would sort of, in a sense, this paper's got you like right on the edge of your seat.
That's right. Exactly.
Wait, conclusion?
Yeah. That's another reason for, that's the nature of research. So you don't get a complete story in any paper, but unless it's a review. But it's interesting to see that some people are still thinking about this.
So you told me originally you wanted to see the state of the field.
Yeah.
Right, Dickson?
Yeah, that's what.
So, Dickson, look at this paper, 1996, by Vassilatis and you.
Yeah, that's right.
Developmental expression of a 43 kilodalton secreted glycoprotein from Trichinella spiralis. Is that one of these ES proteins?
Oh, yeah.
Does that alone induce collagen synthesis?
We don't know.
You didn't try it, right? Why didn't they try it?
That's right. Why didn't they? Good question. If you're listening, try it.
So one of the things you could do, it's kind of old school, but take this ES cell preparation, which they know turns on collagen synthesis.
Right.
And then fractionate it.
Exactly.
And take the fractions and see which one does it.
You got it.
You know,
sure.
Sometimes old experimental approaches
It's not such old school, but it's still, it's divide it in half, divide it in quarter, divide it in eighth, divide it in six, until you get to the right one. Yeah, do that.
Okay. That's basically it. Daniel, did you ever see a case of Trichinella?
Oh, actually, several. I think we've discussed some, right?
We did.
Did we?
And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean that can give you eosinophilia upwards of 80%.
Yes.
Over 80%.
Over.
Huge.
Over 9,000.
That's 18,000 strong. Double the number.
Over 9,000 now. So but a couple of things I found was interesting here is the as Dickson points out, that Trichinella has the ability to basically manipulate at the molecular level muscle cells to create, basically to build this little nurse cell complex for itself.
Right.
And, here they are getting at it. And when they're looking at what's involved, they're finding these inflammatory mediators, things that drive scarring. It reminded me of, something 20 years ago when we were studying why people with hypertension get scarring of the kidney. And, the old idea was, it's mechanical, right? 20 years ago, everything was mechanical, sort of as molecular biology was being born, so to speak. And there was a rat model where you could see the glomeruli. It was a clear kidney. And you could actually put a pipette, you could measure the pressure in the different glomeruli, right? So it's a great model. And, the naive was, the glomeruli with the highest pressure will be the ones that scar the first. And they found no correlation. But when they looked at TGF-beta levels, as we're seeing involved here, the ones with the highest TGF-beta levels were the ones that were scarring first. So there's sort of this whole process where inflammatory mediators are driving changes, and here increased collagen levels, there increased collagen levels.
Yeah.
So I think there may be not even just insights into how trichinella does what it does, but cirrhosis, kidney failure, a lot of inflammatory changes. If you can see how the parasites are manipulating the one way or the other, there may be insights into many disease processes.
So that's a great segue because this has been looked at in nude mice as well. Mm-hmm. And nude mice will develop a very nice infection. They can't control their infections. They just accumulate huge numbers of larvae. There is absolutely no inflammatory response around these worms when it's raised in a nude mouse, whereas in a normal mouse, you can see lots of inflammatory cells around each of these nerve cells, but you still get capsule formation. So it's not an inflammatory-based response per se.
Yep.
But, lots of unanswered questions still out there.
Wouldn't you like to go back in and grab them?
I would like to be a fly on their wall. How's that? And I could say, no, don't do that one. Let's do this one over here.
I often wonder how it will be one day when I no longer have a lab. Will I pine for experimental results?
I don't know.
Or will I be occupied sufficiently with my other endeavors?
It could very well be. I mean, there are a lot of fascinating things out there. Right?
Well, I think if you decide on your own to stop, that's okay. If someone tells you to stop, then probably you pine.
Well, fascinating you should say that, too, because I would have stopped if I had got my grant renewed. So
you wouldn't have stopped. There would be no vertical farms.
None.
So it's a good thing.
In retrospect, yes.
And there would be no TWiP or TWiV probably because,
that's true. I wouldn't have
I asked you to start TWiV with me.
You did.
I should be nice to you.
Nicer. No, you're very nice to me.
Okay. Now is the time for what everyone
they're hanging on the edge
for.
Of their chairs.
Oh, the new. Before we do, I just wanted to, one curious, funny thing. The name they talked about the SMAD. What was it? SMAD2 here.
Yeah.
Do you guys know the story of how that was named?
No.
Tell us.
It's a great story. A lot of these C. elegans. Say the lower order primary people have these really funny ways of naming things, and so SMAD is kind of a conglomeration of different names. Maybe one of these people is listening and they'll write in an email. But the D stands for decapentaplegic. Okay, which goes back, if you think about how things develop with these 15 marginal discs, E-marginal discs, and then so the MAD was Mothers Against Decapentaplegic.
Yes. That's
okay,
right.
so small body molecule, God. Mothers Against Decapentaplegic, and it was a morphogen. And so this is sort of a fun little name, as we're talking about TGF beta 1 and SMAD2 and SMAD3.
It is. They called it the name a portmanteau of MAD and SMA. So yes. MAD was Mothers Against Decapentaplegic, and SMA is gene small body size.
Yeah.
How about that?
Goodness.
Do you know about portmanteaus?
No.
It's kind of when you combine two names.
It's when you get to the
carry your own luggage.
When the ship pulls up, I get out of the portmanteau.
Portmanteau can be a large trunk or suitcase, or a word blending the sounds and combining the meanings of two others.
A portmanteau.
Like motel is a portmanteau of motor and hotel.
Look at that.
And brunch is a portmanteau.
How about that?
There's your lesson in grammar for today.
Okay.
But let's do something we know about.
Okay.
Case study.
Come on, Daniel, help us out here.
All right. Now this, I hope everyone enjoys this. And I will say first off, I don't expect anyone to get this.
Ooh.
Not even Dickson. Dickson won't get this. But what I want you to do, I'm going to preface this. I want people to think it through, and you don't have to give me the organism because no one's going to get that. But you should say, "This is what I would do. This is what I'm thinking about, etc." Okay. And this is a case that comes from a colleague of mine in Australia, and I'm realizing I have a lot of friends in Australia. I don't know why I like Australians so much, but anyway, we have an 80-year-old retired teacher from Atherton Tablelands, right? This is southeast Australia. And she presents to, I'll say this colleague of mine, to his clinic with generalized weakness and a concern for Lyme disease or chronic Q fever. So she's referred to him after 18 months of illness and people not quite sure what's going on. Hopefully they're going to see this gentleman, he's going to sort it out. She'd been seen by a neurologist, and there was a question about her having motor neuron disease. And when she's seen, this is actually just this last October, she's been sick for 18 months, and she describes an insidious onset of limb weakness. And she's now gotten to the point where she needs assistance with showering and dressing. The weakness involves her arms and legs, more proximal than distal. She doesn't have any issues with phonation, so speaking, swallowing, or breathing. There's a 5-kilogram weight loss, no rash, no sensory alterations, pure muscle, no fever, no sweats, no chills. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a little more information. Past medical history, she has a history of osteoarthritis, has had a total hip on the right, a total knee on the right. She had a lumbar disc prolapse back in 2009. She had an episode of myocarditis in 2011. History of elevated cholesterol, for which she's being treated, depression, benign positional vertigo, diverticular disease. She's allergic to apparently penicillin and doxycycline. I always take that with a grain of salt, but that's the history. Family history. Her father has rheumatoid arthritis. Her brother has colon cancer. She's on a number of medications. I'll just list a few. She's on a statin for cholesterol, sertraline for the mood, meloxicam for arthritic pain, omeprazole, that's for stomach acid. Now she's 80 years old, and she is a retired teacher, and she does extensive travel. But when she's not traveling, she's a volunteer carer, C-A-R-E-R. You guys know what that is? That's I had to look that one up. A carer. I didn't know what that was, but someone who takes care of hurt, abandoned wildlife.
All right.
Okay, a carer. She lives with her husband, non-smoker, occasional alcohol. And I mentioned this extensive travel, and she's been everywhere. North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Tasmania. I mean, all over the place. And, you know, a little more detail about this being a carer, this animal contact. She's a wildlife carer. She has a long-standing, been doing this for years, where she takes care of marsupials, right? We're in Australia, so wallabies, kangaroos. And she hand feeds puggles and juvenile echidnas or spiny anteaters.
Yep.
And she has a pet cockatoo.
Are they all?
Yeah.
Really, they're very easy to catch.
Cockatoos?
Yeah, they're all over the place. They're pests. They're absolute pests.
It's a bird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are several varieties. Which one does she have? The sulfur? The white sulfur cockatoo?
Apparently it's described as a gala, G-A-L-A.
Oh, yeah, Gala. A Gala. That's right. It's a pink and gray, beautiful, it's a cockatoo. It's a beautiful bird. That's gorgeous.
Daniel, she didn't have polio as a kid, right?
No history of polio as a kid.
And HIV negative.
Does she take care of sugar gliders?
Not that we know of.
Okay.
Not that she reports.
All right.
On exam, and actually that's a good, just as an aside, when I went out to practice in Colorado, all these people start coming in, I've got post-polio syndrome. And I had not heard of post-polio syndrome in New York. But it's interesting. There was quite a bit because it was such a large polio, I guess, outbreak, you want to call it, or incidents back in, from
the 20s through the 50s, there were 20, 30, 40,000 cases a year in the U.S. of paralytic disease. So her age group is perfect
so
to have post-polio.
So on exam, her vitals are fine. She doesn't have a fever. Neurological exam. She has diffuse, non-tender muscle wasting with no fasciculations or rash. She has normal upper and lower limb tone, but her strength is symmetrically reduced proximally. Okay, it's about 3 out of 5, but distal is reasonable. Distal's maybe 4 out of 5. Her reflexes are good at the knees. She has downgoing plantar reflexes. Normal sensation to all modalities, so soft touch, cold, vibration, etc. Normal cranial nerve exam. Rest exam, normal cardiovascular, respiratory, abdominal exam. And I'm going to give you guys some test results. So she has eosinophilia, okay? Elevated muscle enzyme markers, and an EMG, in EMG showing myopathic changes, but her nerve conduction study is normal. She has a normal ESR SED rate, normal CRP. A bit of tests are also available: Q fever, a stool O&P, Lyme testing, strongyloides. All this stuff's negative. ANA is negative. The first thing they do is they stop the statin therapy, and no change at that point. And so this is what I'm going to leave you with. I don't know if you guys have any questions, but I'm going to be putting out, what do you do next in this woman? And what are you thinking of? What could possibly be doing this? And I'm going to tell you, it's a rare parasite. Let me tell you that. So just sort of a sense of what type of parasite might be doing this and how.
So she's had this for 18 months, you said. This is regressing for 18 months. What's her travel history for the last 3 years?
So that what I was giving you was actually the last 3 years. So she is an extensive traveler, and there actually was a period of, I think, 3 months where she was in Tasmania over this last bit of time.
Well, that's just down the coast. I mean, come on. She lives in southeastern Australia. She could swim the Tasman Strait and be there in no time.
And as you can probably imagine, most of the travel was earlier on. But now it's really gotten to the point where she's not going to be able to travel very much. She's having difficulty just with activities of daily living.
So knowing all of this physical disability was creeping up on her, and she still continued to travel throughout the world. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but now it's getting to the point where she hasn't been traveling.
All right, fine. So we have no idea of where this rare parasite was acquired then.
This is true.
That's basically what I was driving at.
Could be at home, right, Dickson?
It could very well be. And she's a caregiver. Was she giving care to animals throughout the world?
No. The care activity is all there in Australia.
Okay. She lives somewhere near Canberra.
Where's Atherton Tablelands? I'd have to look at a map.
It's below the Snowy Mountains, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
No, it's at southeast. You said southeast Australia, so southeast Australia is...
rereading The Hobbit with my son, so when you say the Snowy Mountains, I'm...
Right. Well, I spent 6 months at Melbourne, so I got familiar with the area, I guess. Fascinating stuff, though, because, I mean, I don't know anything about the parasites of marsupials to begin with, so if this came from one of them, then this would be... You're right. I wouldn't have had a guess. I don't have any guesses. I'm actually seeing here on a map. It's southwest of Cairns, Atherton Tablelands. Cairns. Oh, Cairns is further north then.
Cairns is all the way up.
Yeah, so all the way up to the top.
Yeah, so actually this is northeast.
She's north of Brisbane.
Northeast.
Yeah, this is northeast Australia.
Oh, so she's in a different place.
That changes everything.
She's in the tropics, right?
It does. This is where they raise a lot of sugar cane and stuff. This is where the cane toads are all.
Yeah, it's east of Darwin. Yeah, it's in the tropics.
Got it. And a lot of pythons in that area also, by the way. Crazy stuff, but interesting. And fruit bats.
Yep.
Lots of flying foxes.
All right, so there's a challenge to our listeners.
Wow. Daniel, you finally
He told us he was going to give us a hard
stumped
one.
the stars here.
Told us he was going to give us a hard one. That's wonderful.
On Card Talk, Stump the Chumps.
Yeah, I have to look this one up.
Where would you go to look this up?
Googlepedia. Where else am I going to go? I don't have any clinical experience.
No, I mean, it's
I
fascinating.
I could ask an ID doc. Oh, that would be Daniel.
Oh, right. But you're gonna give us some more laboratory results later.
That's
Is
it.
that correct?
No.
Afterwards when you start to reveal the case.
She has eosinophilia, elevated muscle.
She does.
The EMG shows myopathic changes. Nerve conduction is normal.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yep.
I got it.
So what do you do next, and then
What do you do next
right.
then? Yeah.
that's,
Okay.
that's the
folks.
big question. What do you do next, and what should we be thinking about?
Good.
Because that's gonna matter, like what we do next and how we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I presume that histopathology has been done already and found nothing, or we didn't ask that question. So,
Well, next time you get
Yeah.
more info.
Okay,
So you got to tell me what you would order.
All right. Let's do a
All right.
couple of email.
yeah.
First one is from Mark, who writes, Dear TWiPerati, I've gotten out of sync for TWiP cases and response dates. It has taken a while to get caught up with all the Twix episodes that congregated in my iPhone after returning from a 15-day cruise and 1-week vacation. More on that later. So he gives his analysis. I present my analysis below and plead for mercy from the TWiP court for being late. This is from TWiP 126.
Oh my.
He guessed a fluke, Clonorchus. Why? From early shows, DDD described flukes huge in the host's liver. My assumption is that the reported cyclone, which destroyed the home, probably contaminated his drinking water, thus infecting the patient. A large 6-centimeter square area in the patient's liver. Wasn't that the amoeboma?
Yeah.
This was the Fiji gentleman with the amoeboma.
That's right.
Or amoebic abscess.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Our cruise traveled from Florida through the Caribbean, northern Colombia through the Panama Canal, up the west coast of Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Mexico, and back to L.A.
Sounds delightful.
Among our dinner companions were a urologist from Hawaii and a
Nice.
cardiac nurse from Minnesota. Casual conversation soon turned to Zika, etc. Nightly, yours truly would regale them with some horrible puns combining parasite or virus names with some type of food to be had on board. On a serious note, they asked how I, a non-MD, had learned so much about parasites. I credited TWiV, TWiP, and TWIM. Only the urologist listens to podcasts, so I hope by now you have a new listener. Today, the weather in California was sunny. We're bracing for another storm and hoping our dams have enough headroom so as not to overflow and flood.
Right.
On tonight's dog walk, I can start TWiP 127 and listen to the case's solution. Mark in San Jose. Now, he sent a list of all the puns that he made
I
up,
see this.
which we'll put in the show notes, but here are a few of them. Anthrax in the arugula, ascaris in the avocado, dracunculus in the dessert, hookworm in the hummus, leishmania in the lasagna, paragonimus in the pasta, strongyloides in the sake, trichinella in the tri-tip, trichiurus in the tarragon, trichomonas in the tuna, trypanosomes in the tofu, and of course, whipworm in the wheat and ziki in the zeta. Well, I'm sure they were howling over your puns, or maybe crying.
So each one of these parasites is associated with a food of the same first letter. So, it reminds me of that song that you sing to little kids, A, you're adorable, B, you're so beautiful.
Dickson,
You should be able to put this to music.
Go ahead, Dickson, do it.
Anthrax in arugula, ascaris in the avocado.
Yeah, but you have to make a good tune first.
It has to have the right syncopation. I have to work on this. If you want me to do this, I will, but
I'd rather you do the pronunciation
Yeah, I'll
of
do
the
that
parasite
too.
name.
I'll do that too.
Dickson, can you take Anthony's email?
I would love to. Anthony writes, a local volunteer caring for outdoor cats in Jersey City found this new face at the feeding station the other morning. You don't need an upstate cabin to meet raccoons. By the way, a curious thing about the raccoon roundworms is that they aggressively infest an extremely wide range of animals. Curiously, felines appear to be immune. He's referring, of course, to Balis ascaris procyon.
Sent a picture of a raccoon.
He did. On the topic of wild animals in the not-so-wild, has Professor Despommier ever seen the deer in Fort Lee Historical Park? Yes, I have, to the George Washington Bridge. I certainly have. I spotted them there at sunset in the winter around 5 years ago, eating out at the garbage cans in the parking lot. Whether the deer chose sunset because of the natural
crepuscular.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for that.
That's one of my favorite words.
Crepuscular activities, or because they learned that the park closes then, I don't know. But there are lots of deer in Bergen County, lots of deer populations all over the place, in these little pockets of nature parks and stuff. So,
for our listeners, crepuscular is tending to feed at dawn and dusk. What a wonderful word.
Okay. I'm going to practice that one when I go home.
Yes. Just throw it casually into conversation.
Daniel, can you take the next one?
Yes. Jacob writes, Dear Editor.
That's funny. That's very funny.
It is not surprising that leishmanial parasites are influenced by sandfly gut microbiome and vice versa. Every organism with a gut is influencing and influenced by its microbiome. Sincerely yours, Jacob, Jerusalem.
Yes, the Jacob, but if you don't look, you don't find out.
This is very true.
That's true.
You may assume it must be this way, but unless you answer the question, you don't know.
Right. But then the other thing is, how does it affect? That's the other
first
question.
you have to confirm that it affects, and then you find out how. That's harder. That's much harder.
Much more difficult.
Daniel, that was short. You want to take the next one?
Sure. Ari writes, Dear Professors, this is the first time I write to you hoping to be lucky 14, but really also to express my sincere and deep respect to your legendary podcasts. I really love and worship them. They have been some sort of medicine for my soul, and that's not just some fancy exaggeration.
Wow.
I am a semi-Greek quasi-physicist who left the academic world behind, not that I had any advances, to be honest, to take care of my father after my mother, after she was diagnosed with tongue cancer back in 2005. She had quite a number of complications, with the incident of completely losing sight from one eye and part of the other due to a candida infection during a long hospitalization period being just one of them. She was very brave and optimistic and had adapted to so many challenges and changes due to surgeries and therapies and several infections being carried along the way. Klebsiella was another one. Antibiotic-resistant strains seem to be becoming an increasing issue in hospitals around the world, right? She passed away 3 years ago, small cell lung cancer, but not a metastasis from the first one, apparently. We had some great times, though, during this period. Humor had always been a good weapon, and seeking truth and facts in a calm manner being another one. I started to get more and more interested in all things biology at all as we faced these adventures. And even if I don't always understand all volumes in all dimensions of your final analysis, your random podcast started being a regular sedative for the mind, making me wonder and look up things and even take courses online. Proud to have passed virology too, on Coursera among them. TWiPerati became the voice of reason in my world, equally in very dark as also bright times. And well, it's fascinating science presented brilliantly by all of you. It kept the mind set and tuned somehow, a stress relief if you want. Very amusing, and I often manage to fall asleep listening to them. I hope you don't get that the wrong way, of course. This seems to be a theme. I'm curious what part of our podcast puts people to sleep. But anyway, even if politically, economically, sociologically, and probably other ways, things in Greece are kind of deteriorating. There are some advantages to being Greek, too. Naturally, so many words and terminology comes from my native language roots, so I can always smile when you randomly stop for some linguistic puzzles and feel I can still compete understanding that parts with a certain ease. You don't need to be a polymath for that, at least. There's a smile there. I know it does not mean really much coming from me, and I apologize for the extended letter, but thank you from the bottom of my heart. You make this world even more wonderful and more reachable. Sincerely yours, kind regards, and God or universe or whatever spread you with 9 Beauforts here today.
That's lovely.
It is lovely.
You know, it means a great deal coming from you.
Absolutely. You bet.
You know, our listeners are all very precious to us. We love that you And in fact, we don't hear from a lot of them, and so it's great to hear that.
Yeah.
You really appreciate this. So it means a great deal to all of us. I speak for everyone in all the Twix podcasts in saying that. We appreciate that. And I'm going to read this on TWiP, I think, on Friday, too. Because apparently it's Twix, but he sent it to TWiP.
Nice.
Thank you. Jarrett writes, hello, all. We're just writing for the chance to win the book. As an aside, I've always been curious about Dr. Griffin's travels. Mm-hmm. He seems to travel all the time. When he sees patients in Thailand, Peru, and elsewhere, is he doing so as a volunteer, or is there a job out there wherein a tropical medicine specialist wanders the globe treating the ills of human hosts? Keep up the good work. Jarrett is in Austin, Texas. Is that a job,
yeah.
Daniel?
I don't want to give away the secret, right? No. This, when I was in, I guess it was Thailand. I was with a gentleman, Ted Coons, and he made the comment. He said, you're not going to make a living. You're not going to make a lot of money taking care of poor people because they're poor. They don't have any money. So when I'm out there doing that stuff, it's I'm not earning any money doing that. I've got to earn my money back here at home. So somehow convincing Columbia and ProHealth and everyone else to pay me money so I can continue to do that work.
It's volunteer work that you do.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
I
mean, my dad was a surgeon years ago, and I remember I was in the hospital visiting, and someone came in the room, and they said to him, "There's a patient down the hall you should see, but they don't have insurance." He said, "What room is it?"
Right.
He didn't care. He didn't care because he came from modest origins in Italy as well.
Yep.
John, let's see. You're next. I read that one.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, you're next, John.
John writes, hi, TWiP doctors. Firstly, Vincent's comment about dihydroxy chicken wire being the active ingredient in kava was beautiful. I guffawed. Secondly, don't be disheartened by a lack of responses. Last week's case was hard, at least for a non-parasitologist. Thirdly, I'd love a book, but a tome like Diagnostic Medical Parasitology would probably be more socially useful going to an actual diagnostician. If I win and a medical professional enters the competition, I would be happy for the TWiP team to give the book to them if I could get a coveted TWiP mug instead. It's evening, 11 degrees C, and drizzling in Limerick. Thanks and regards, John in Limerick, Ireland.
I have to say that I learned dihydroxy chicken wire from Dr. Despommier many years ago.
Well, and I heard it from somebody else, so gosh knows where it started. But I had 1 year when I was in Toledo, Ohio, God knows why I was there. That was my first job. I volunteered to give an adult education course in molecular biology to pharmacists. And I began by drawing all these chemical formulas on the board, none of which had true meaning. And I wanted to make a joke about it because I knew that they were expecting lots of complicated stuff to come. How could that possibly have come from me? Because I know very little molecular biology to begin with, but I knew enough that they wanted to know how the drugs that they were prescribing for cancer patients worked. Mm-hmm. Okay, so most of them inhibit DNA synthesis, but there were lots of others too. So I drew 3 structures on the board. One is I drew a lot of FEs with pluses in a large circle. That was number 1. Number 2, I drew a C-H2O. And 3, I drew a picture of lots of benzene rings all connected together with 2 hydroxyl groups on it. So I said, okay, I'm going to hold you responsible for all of these structures. Let's talk about the first one. And they were looking at me like I'm absolute crazy. I said, what is the name of this compound? I said, you went to school, you've had chemistry, you should know what this is. And I was being a little bit hyperbolic here. And I said, these are all iron molecules, right? And they're positively charged with 2 charges per molecule. So if you add it all together, it's a Ferris wheel.
Yeah, very good. I like that too.
And they laughed. And then I said, the second molecule, what do you think this is? And they looked at me and they thought, okay, this is going to be fun. All right. So the second molecule, what could it possibly be? And I said, that's the formula for seawater. Mm-hmm. Good. And I said, and the third one is dihydroxy chicken wire. And
they laughed again.
And they all laughed. And then I got them to relax, and then I could teach them something.
This is shows why you should repeat things, because John hadn't heard it years ago.
Yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely.
Should always repeat things.
Fantastic.
By the way, I was lecturing at Einstein a couple of years ago, and a young lady in the audience had a T-shirt with the elemental names for iron, uranium, carbon, and potassium. I cannot repeat it on this show. Iron, uranium, carbon, potassium.
We'll get to it.
Daniel, can you take the last one?
Sure. Charlie writes, "Hi, y'all. I'm hoping I'm lucky 14. As an aside, have you all ever thought about doing a TWiP on the parasites of honeybees? I go to veterinary school at Tufts, where we just started the first honeybee medicine class at a vet school in North America. The French are about 4 years ahead of us. Anyway, honeybees are host to an array of fascinating parasites,
Indeed.
From the aptly named Varroa destructor mite to Nosema, a microsporidian.
Or Nosema.
To Nosema, thank you.
Quite welcome.
Apocephalus
Good.
borealis,
Excellent.
a phorid fly. Hoping to hear a case soon about a 6-month-old bee with diarrhea. Nosema. Thanks for the great podcast. Cheers, Charlie.
That's amazing. The honeybee medicine class.
It's big business though. Honeybees are getting sick and they're disappearing. This is colony collapse syndrome, and they're distraught over this. Entire industries will be wiped out if the honeybee disappears. So their job is to make sure that doesn't happen. And so I'm amazed that there's a career path now for people interested in saving the honeybee. That's great.
Because we've talked a lot about it on TWiP in terms of colony collapse, and these mites and microsporidians have come up.
Yeah.
I would love to have someone who is an expert on parasites of honeybees. If anyone knows someone. Do you know anyone, Dickson?
Well, Charlie, actually.
Charlie's taking the class.
Yeah, well, he's got to be taking it from somebody, so we should ask Charlie who the expert is that's teaching this course.
We'll bring him on.
Find out for you. That's right.
All right, that'll do it for TWiP 128. You can find it at iTunes or at microbe.tv/TWiP. And, of course, most of you consume it on your phone or tablet, in which case you have a favorite podcatch app, and then you just subscribe for free to them. And it's all free, and subscribe and listen to them all. They're wonderful. We enjoy doing them, and I actually like listening to them as well. Think about supporting our work. Become a patron of TWiP and all of the Microbe TV family of science shows. You can go over to microbe.tv/contribute. We have a number of ways you can help us out. We have a Patreon account where you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month, or we have other ways as well. Microbe.tv/contribute. And, of course, send your questions and case guesses to TWiP at microbe.tv. Dickson Despommier is here at Columbia University Medical Center, where for years he worked on Trichinella spiralis.
That's true.
He's also at parasiteswithoutborders.com, thelivingriver.org, trichinella.org. Hey, Dickson, we have to update trichinella.org.
That'd be fun.
Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome, Vincent.
Daniel Griffin is at CUMC and also at parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, always a pleasure.
And I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. The music you hear on TWiP is composed and performed by Ronald Jenkins. You can find his work at ronaldjenkins.com. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this episode, Blue Apron. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP is parasitic.